Today's scripture reading is from John 21, 1 through 17. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just as the day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore. Yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, do you have any fish?" They answered, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of the fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved therefore said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. When they got out on the land, they saw a charcoal fire in place, with fish laid out on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you've just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thanks, Laura Jones. What we've been up to this fall is we have been looking at various scenes throughout the Gospels where Jesus shares a meal with somebody. If it's with an individual person or a party, a group of people. And we've been doing this because it's over these meal encounters, these meal experiences, that you really get a unique window into who Jesus is. And that's actually the explicit agenda of the passage that Laura Jones just read for us this morning. The key word in this story is the word revealed. The main part of the story is verses 1 through 14, and then I added the next part of the story. But if you look at verse 1, the word revealed shows up twice. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way. And then it goes on, and then at the end, verse 14, this was now the third time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. So this whole passage is bracketed by this idea of Jesus being revealed. Who is this person that he is being, how are they discovering who Jesus really is? And really at the heart of this revelation is this question, which is, how does Jesus respond to failures? And here's how I want to set up that question as we get deeper into this. A number of years ago, there was a movie that came out called Chappaquiddick. You may have seen it on Netflix. It's a story, it's about the true story of what happened in the life of Ted Kennedy. He, right before, I guess a couple of years before, he was going to run for president, just like his older two brothers had done. There was an incident that took place in his life. He was at a party and had been drinking and drove home this young woman who was on his staff, a young woman named Mary Jo, and he careened off of the bridge and crashed into the lake in this area called Chappaquiddick Island, which is kind of near Martha's Vineyard. Mary Jo died, and Ted and his family and his kind of team around him all try to cover it up. It was all a big kind of damage control. This is going to ruin your chances. We've got to minimize your involvement in this. And so they're lying to the press, they're lying to the police. They're kind of just spinning this story, and he has this burdened conscience by it. And then in the end, he comes clean. He goes to the police himself and explains, here's what happened. And then he goes and tells his dad that he just told the police. He just confessed to the police. And his dad, Joe, who was in a wheelchair in kind of the later stages of his life, was very displeased. He did not want his son to do this, and yet his son did it against his wishes. And there's this really poignant scene where the dad calls his son to come near to him, and he whispers in his ear these words, "You've lost my confidence. Now, do what I say and never lose it again. Otherwise, it will be a nearly impossible task to restore it." Now, I begin that way because my guess is when you fail, when you really screw up, you do something wrong, say something that you wish you hadn't said, done something you wish you wouldn't have done, you get called on it, you get caught, you get exposed, and that feeling kind of comes over you where you just feel like, I'm such an idiot. My guess is, for most of us, as we think about how God experiences us in that moment, we may think he sounds a lot like the voice of Joe Kennedy in that movie. You've lost my confidence. Do what I say. Otherwise, it is going to be impossible to restore it. How does Jesus respond to failures? If he is being revealed, this is who Jesus is, which the Bible says Jesus is the exact representation of God. Meaning when you look at Jesus, you are looking at God. There's not a God behind him that's different than him. It's you're looking at God. So how does God respond to failures is the same question. How does Jesus respond to failures? And as he is being revealed in this passage, it is not with a condemning, scolding, wagging finger in their face. You have lost my confidence. No, he does three things. He pursues failures, he feeds failures, and he uses failures. So let's look at each of those as we walk our way through this story. How does Jesus pursue failures? How does he feed failures? How does he use failures? First, let's talk about the pursuit part. And this is really the first 4 verses of this passage. But this whole story takes place right on the heels of Jesus' death and resurrection. So this may have been a week or 2 weeks after all of that went down. And there's a group of the disciples that are up near the Sea of Tiberias, which is the Sea of Galilee. And the main thing that gets highlighted in this story is the failure of their fishing trip. I mean, you read the story if you were paying attention to it. In verse 3, Peter has this idea to do some night fishing. He invites the gang to join him. They say, great, we're in. They go out on the water. They fish all night and catch nothing. Now, if you think about that, that is hour after hour after hour after exhausting, throwing the net in, pulling it out, getting back and forth. Just, you're worn out. And these are experienced pro-level fishermen, and they come up with a goose egg. After hours, they get nothing. They catch 0. But that's not the main failure. That's, I think, is really what's going on in this story. Here's what's really fascinating. The sea, if you go back to Luke chapter 24, the first time that Jesus appears to the disciples after his resurrection, he tells them, I want you to stay in Jerusalem. You can go look it up. He says, I want you to stay in Jerusalem. And here we are just a few days, weeks after he said that, and the disciples are by the Sea of Tiberias, Sea of Galilee, which is 70 miles north of Jerusalem. Why are the disciples 70 miles away? He told them, I want you to stay here, and they leave 70 miles away. Scholars are kind of stumped. They don't really know why they made this 70-mile fishing expedition. I have a guess, and here's my guess. My guess is predicated on understanding what happened in these past 2 weeks. Here's what happened. If you rewind the tape just a few weeks before, Jesus is praying in the garden. He's overwhelmed with anxiety, worry. He knows what's coming. He asks his friends, the disciples, will you stay up and pray with me? Will you pray for me? And they don't. They fall asleep. Then one of his friends leaves and goes and tells the authorities, hey, I can tell you where Jesus is right now if you give me money. And they give him some money. He rats out Jesus, makes him quick cash. One of his closest friends sells him out, betrays him. Then, when the authorities show up to arrest Jesus in the garden, Simon Peter, one of his good buddies, pulls out a sword and chops off the ear of one of the soldiers. And Jesus is like, whoa, what are you doing? That's not how we do things in the kingdom. He has to kind of clean up the mess that Peter did. And then later that night, Peter denies even knowing who Jesus is. Not one time, but 3 times. Then after Jesus is arrested and barbarically tortured and sentenced to an execution, he's carrying his cross. He's carrying this crossbeam of his own cross. That's this heavy, piece of wood on his back. And the Roman soldiers, they grab this random guy, a guy named Simon of Cyrene, who is a foreigner, to help assist him carry his cross to the rest of the way to get to his execution site. Why didn't they grab one of Jesus' friends to help him? Why this rando that's just kind of standing by the side of the road? Here's why. His friends weren't there. They had paced out. They had run for the hills. Then, after Jesus is strung up on a cross, and he's bleeding out, and he's suffocating, and he's dying as he eventually dies, his friends just leave his body there. They just left him for dead. It's this other guy, somebody who's not one of the 12, a guy named Joseph of Arimathea, who says, hey, I'll take the body, I'll pay for the tomb, I'll give him a proper burial. His friends don't. Then, it's not even one of the 12 that come to anoint him. It's this guy named Nicodemus. It says that he shows up with 75 pounds of myrrh and aloe to anoint Jesus' body for burial. Why aren't his friends doing it? What just fell? Something just ran. Did that fall from the ceiling? I don't know, it came in here. Anyway, sorry. Where are Jesus' friends in the moments of his last hours when he needs them? They have run and they have hidden and locked themselves in a room. They're saving their own skins. And at every point when Jesus needed them, they failed. And I think the reason why they're 70 miles away is because they have felt the weight of failure after failure after failure, and they're still running. And they're still hiding. It kind of reminds me of what's going on in that scene from The Lion King. You know that pivotal scene where you have sweet little Simba who gets tricked by his evil uncle Scar. Scar orchestrates the death of Simba's dad, Mufasa, and he does it in such a way where he tells Simba to go somewhere that he's not supposed to be, but Mufasa goes to rescue him, and Mufasa ends up dying, and it looks like it is all Simba's fault, even though it's all orchestrated from behind the scenes. But you remember the scene when Scar, the evil uncle, comes to Simba, and he's weeping, he's in shock, he's overwhelmed with his own shame. And here's what Scar says. It's that same voice, the voice actor of I forget his name, the guy who's Professor Snape. It's like the greatest, most sinister voice ever. And he says, Simba, what have you done? The king is dead, and if it weren't for you, he'd still be alive. Simba's just crying, and Scar goes, oh, what will your mother think? And Simba looks at him and says, what do I do? What am I going to do? And Scar looks at him and says, run. Run away and never return. And he does. Simba just bolts. And that's the whole second act of the movie. It is Simba running away. It's him finding a new identity. He is trying to totally detach from this shameful part of his story. He is running and he is hiding because he can't face his own failures. This is the natural human instinct. When we see our failures, when we see our flaws, when we see our problems get so overwhelming, it's so painful, we do not want to face them, and so we run. Adam and Eve ran, and they hid from God when they disobeyed him in the garden. Here are the disciples, and they are running and hiding because they can't face the way that they have failed their friend and their mentor and their hero. And you and I, when we fail, our instinct is to run. The only question is, what type of running do you do? There's a few different types of ways that people run. The first way that you can run is to deny it, to just deny that your failure even happened. So, you get in a conflict with somebody and you hurt somebody's feelings. You know you've done something wrong. You know you're kind of in trouble. You know you're exposed. And it's just, let's just stuff that down and smile and pretend like that didn't happen. And I'm going to turn up the charm and I'm going to fix you breakfast and everything's going to go great. And we're not going to go there. Let's just pretend. Let's just not talk about it. Stuff it down, deny it. Another way we run is by numbing. It's too painful to face, and so we just drink. We just medicate. We shop. We eat. We exercise. We work. We get religious. We do these things because it's too painful to face it, so I'm just going to try to kill my pain sensors. Here's another way that we run is we just shut down. You just withdraw. You kind of crawl into your cave and just isolate. You can do this with other people. If you're in conflict with somebody and you know you've said something wrong or done something wrong or you're upset or you're frustrated, you can just shut down and go mute and give the other person the silent treatment. And they're like, hey, what's wrong? And you know what you say. You say, nothing. And nothing's not wrong. You're 2 feet away from them, but you're sprinting in the opposite direction. So we're running. So here's the question. How is Jesus revealed? What does he do with failures who are running? He runs after them. He pursues them. Look at verse 4. It says, just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. They didn't know it was Jesus. They weren't expecting Jesus to show up. They weren't expecting him to follow them up there, but here they are 70 miles away, and bam, there he is. What is he doing? He's pursuing them. He said, I am the good shepherd. And I will leave the flock of 99 to go chase down even the one. That's what he's doing. Here's a metaphysical question for you this morning. Why are you in church right now? You say, well, I come every week. That's not who cares? That's not an interesting question. Why am I in church right now? Maybe you say, well, I have to be. People pay me to be here. Or you say, well, a friend invited me, my spouse made me come, or, whatever. Whatever the circumstances are, could it be that maybe the reason underneath all the other reasons is because Jesus is pursuing you? Whatever circumstance is, but isn't it interesting that here you are with all of your failures and regret and shames that you've brought into this room, and here I am with all the shame and regret and all the things that I've brought into this room, and here we all are, and it's like, there's Jesus on the shore. He's here, chasing us, pursuing us. Does he pursue us to just wag a finger in our face and to say, you've lost my confidence. I'm disappointed in you. He pursues failures, that's the first thing, but he doesn't pursue them to express his disappointment. He pursues them, number 2, to feed them. This is amazing. Look back at the story. In verse 6, from the shore, you got Jesus on the shore. They said it's about 100 yards away from where the boat is. He calls out, hey, cast the net on the right side of the boat. And as far as they know, this is some just rando on the beach that's telling them how to do their jobs. And they're like, I guess we got nothing to lose. We've been doing this for hours and we can't get anything. Let's put it on the other side. And so they do it, and they get this massive massive haul of fish. It says it's so heavy they can't pick it up and put it in the boat. They just have to leave it in the water. And one of the disciples starts putting two and two together and realizes, oh my word, that's Jesus on the shore. And in verse 7, he tells Simon Peter. Peter throws on a shirt, jumps into the water, and starts swimming as fast as he can to get to the shore before the boat, which I'm sure, I don't know, I wasn't there, but I'm guessing everyone that was left in the boat was thinking, not cool, Peter, because now we don't have any extra help to lug all of this fish and row this boat to get to the shore, but they finally do. And look at what happens in verse 9. This is a massive detail. Verse 9, when they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place with fish laid out on it and bread. Jesus has already been cooking. He didn't need them to catch the fish in order to feed them. They show up, breakfast is cooking, breakfast is on. How does Jesus respond to failures who have betrayed him and who have sprinted away from him? He pursues them and spreads a table for them. Look at verse 12. Out of Jesus' mouth, he says, come and have breakfast. That is an amazing verse. Come and have breakfast. Why is that so important? Why is that so amazing? Here's why. Think about it like this. A number of years ago, NPR did this interview with a guy named Daryl Davis, older black man, a blues musician. And he's being interviewed because he's been doing something fascinating for the past 30 years. But it all started 30 years ago in like a blues bar. He said he was playing one night, and after the show, there's this white guy that came up to him and said, man, that was really great. I've never seen a black guy play like Jerry Lee Lewis before. And Daryl goes, what are you talking about? Like, where do you think Jerry Lee Lewis learned how to play like that? It was from black musicians. And he says, no, Jerry Lee Lewis invented that style. He came up with it. And so they kind of get into this friendly banter, this debate, and they're talking about music. And after a while, the white guy looks at him and says, you know what? I have never sat down in my entire life and had a conversation with a black person before. And Daryl Davis goes, what? How is that possible? You're older than I am. And the guy takes out his wallet and shows him this card. It was his membership card in the Ku Klux Klan. Apparently you have membership cards, like Costco. I don't know how it works, but apparently you have membership cards. And so Daryl has this moment where he goes, oh my goodness, we are just connecting as human beings, talking about music. We're becoming friends, and yet you have this whole belief structure based off of hatred and prejudice. Like, how does that make any sense? And he says that was the moment when he decided, what I'm going to do for the rest of my life is I'm going to pursue members of the KKK and have friendly conversations with them. And that's what he's been doing for over 30 years. I don't know how he does it. He travels around the country. He sets up these meetings with KKK members. And here is his strategy. Sit down and have a meal together. And he says what's crazy is over the course of the meal, as our friendship develops, as we kind of hang out, get to know each other, somehow their hatred starts to melt away. And he says over the course of 30 years, over 200 people have left the KKK, turned in their robes, sometimes have even given him their robes. And he keeps them and he collects them. And here's what he said. He says the reason why he does it, quote, is as a reminder of the dent that he has made in racism by simply sitting down and having dinner with people. How is having a meal with someone that powerful that would pull somebody out of the KKK? Here's why. I put this quote in the beginning of your bulletin to try to illustrate this, but in preparation for this whole series on Meals with Jesus, I read this book by, it was a late Episcopal priest, guy named Robert Capon, and the book is called The Supper of the Lamb, and it is a book that is pitched as if it's like a cookbook, but it's not, even though it has some recipes in it, but it's really theological reflections about cooking, theological reflections about food. It's amazing. There's an entire chapter on the cosmic significance of an onion. I mean, it's the best. And but he's kind of old school, and he's a little ornery and opinionated. And at the end of the book, he goes into why dinner parties are the best and why cocktail parties are the worst. So, I'm going to read this to you. You can follow along if you want, but, this is his hot take, not mine, but I think it's interesting. He says this: a dinner party is an honest attempt to create a company, not a crowd. Persons matter at the table. The giver of a cocktail party is a man who hedges his bets and cops out of the dangers of entertaining. He requires nothing of his guests but their physical presence. If they turn out to be untempered duds or ill-tempered bores, it's no skin off his nose. They can simply find their own corner of outer darkness and fall apart any way they like. But when he sits me down at his table, he declares himself willing to let me into his own life. He has, you see, been willing to take me on as God takes me. To ask a man to break bread with you is to extend friendship, to proclaim in love that you want not his, but him. The word companion comes from two Latin words, cum meaning together and panis meaning bread, where we get panera, bread from. Companion literally means bread together. What makes meals so powerful, so transformative, it is because what you are doing is you're sitting down and you look at somebody and you're extending friendship. The reason why over 200 people left the KKK was because somebody who was their racial enemy pursued them and extended friendship to them. And it's hard to hold on to your hatred when you are loved like that. So here is Jesus, and he's pursuing people who have failed him, and he's extending them friendship. This meal is tangible grace to them. He's giving them a table. He's saying, you are welcome. You're not going to receive a lecture. You're not going to be scolded. You're getting food. You're getting breakfast. Come, have breakfast. This meal is infinitely gracious to those who receive it, and yet it is infinitely costly for the one who serves it. Think about what it cost Daryl Davis to go pursue those KKK people. It cost him his time, his money, his energy, his safety. I mean, he had no way of knowing how are they going to receive me. It's very risky. He risks his life to pursue his racial enemies, and yet here is Jesus, and he doesn't just risk his life. He gives his life. On the cross, what he is doing is he is bearing all of our failures so that we never have to get the finger. We never have to be scolded. We never have to be judged ever again. He bears the judgment so that we can have a feast. What he's doing to these disciples is he's taking the salvation that he just purchased for them with his life, death, and resurrection, and he serves it on a plate. And he doesn't just do it for them, he does it for us. Which is Jesus' way of saying, you are welcome. Come, eat, feast on a grace that was purchased at a high cost for you. Jesus feeds failures. But here's the last thing, and this is pretty amazing, but I'll be quick. He uses failures. He doesn't just pursue them. He doesn't just feed them. He uses them, which means he repurposes them. He utilizes them. He employs them. As I was studying this passage, it started to bother me. Okay, if it's true that Peter and the disciples are running from Jesus, they're doing the Simba thing and they're feeling shame and they're running. Why then, as soon as Peter learns that it's Jesus on the shore, why does he instantly start running towards him? Why does he throw on a shirt, jump in the water, and start Michael Phelpsing it towards the shoreline? Why not keep running the other way? Is it just that Peter is this impulsive, this, like squirrel-brained, or is there something deeper going on? I think there's something deeper going on. Remember I told you that the Sea of Tiberias is another name for the Sea of Galilee? The Sea of Galilee was the exact lake, the same exact sea where Peter first met Jesus back in Luke chapter 5. If you go to Luke chapter 5, here's what happens in that story. Peter has been out fishing all night with his fishing crew, and they come to the shore and they have caught nothing. Does that sound familiar? And there's Jesus on the shore. He's just there. He's uninvited. He just shows up and he says, hey, why don't you go back out and put down your nets again a little further out? Does that sound any familiar? And so they do. They get back in the boat. They go out. They drop down the nets and they catch such a massive haul of fish that it's bursting the nets. They can barely even hold it together. Does that sound familiar? In Luke chapter 5, when Peter first meets Jesus, and this is the story, he's so overwhelmed with God's grace and with Jesus' generosity. Oh my goodness, what in the world just happened? He says, depart from me, for I'm a sinful man. Get away from me. I'm not worthy. And Jesus says, no. Don't be afraid. From now on, I'm going to make you a catcher of men. Meaning, I want you to take in this lavish, overwhelming banquet that just got dropped into your lap, and I want you to give it away to other people. I want you to bring them into this kingdom of grace and of generosity. What is going on in this story? Jesus is intentionally recreating the moment when they first met. It's almost like Jesus is saying to Peter, okay, whoa. Let's rewind the tape. Let's go back to the beginning. You remember right here when we met each other on this exact same spot, Peter? Remember, you were doing life on your own. And how was it working for you? Not so great. But I showed up and I was uninvited, and yet you received grace upon grace upon grace, and you were overwhelmed, and I took you in and I sent you out and said, go feed other people, bring other people into the kingdom. And we did that, but you failed, and then you ran, and now you're right back on the same spot, and you're doing life on your own again, apart from me. How's it working out for you? Still struggling? Still failing? And what did I do? More grace, more fish, more abundance. It's like what Jesus is saying to Peter is this: the thing that I want seared into your soul is not this message. I'm a screw up. I'm an idiot. I'm a failure. He says the thing that I want seared into your very being is I am loved. The God of the universe extends grace to failures like me. And then, this is why, right after this story, Jesus pulls Simon aside in verses 15 through 17. Simon Peter, he tells Peter 3 times, I want you to feed my lambs. I want you to feed my sheep. Feed them, tend them, feed them. The story hasn't changed. He says, I'm still sending you out. I want you to be a fisher of men, but now he changes the metaphor. He's using food language now. I want you to feed people. You have experienced the banquet of my grace. You've tasted it. You've been nourished by it. Now go feed others with it. Give that away to other people. He uses failures, and we know what happens right after this. Just a few weeks later, Peter and the gang, they go back to Jerusalem, which is where they were supposed to be all along. And in Acts chapter 2, Peter stands up in front of this massive crowd of people, and he tells them about the beauty and the wonder of Jesus and the salvation that he accomplished through his life and his death and his resurrection. And it says that 3,000 people put their faith in Jesus that day. He becomes a fisher of men. He uses failures. When you and I fail, there is a voice that comes up. It's like the voice of Scar. It says, run. Run away, never return. And it's fueled by that whisper that says, you have lost my confidence. Don't ever do it again or you'll never get it back. And here's the voice of Jesus, and he says, bring your failures to me. You won't get a lecture, you'll get a feast. And as you take in the sweetness of my grace, I want you to go give it away to other people. Don't hoard it, but go give it away. It's like he's saying, as you taste my banquet, I'm going to send you out as the waiters and the waitresses to go serve that feast to others in need. You and I live in a city that has much need of the grace of Jesus and of the love of Jesus. And so if you are someone who has tasted the sweetness of Jesus' grace, how might you give it away to others this week? How might you serve it to others this afternoon? In the form of forgiveness, in the form of a word of blessing, in the form of an act of service. There's a million ways to serve up the buffet. How will you do it? Consider that an invitation for you this morning. Let me pray. Father, thank you that you don't see us in our failure, in our rebellion, in our disobedience, and just discard us as people who have no more use for you. But you take broken people and you employ us in your kingdom. You use failures to be the dispensers of your grace. And so would you be so kind as to use us? For those of us in this room who have never tasted the sweetness of your grace, would you give us the gift of trusting you for the first time? And for those of us who have, would you encourage us to be the kind of people that freely give that banquet away to other people? Father, thank you for your love and your mercy and your kindness and your gentleness towards failures like me and like us. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.